Here's a question. If you're a small country and you're invaded by your much larger and more powerful neighbor with at least 3 times as many troops, significant numerical superiority in tanks, artillery, and aircraft, and a national economy that was about 10 times larger before the invasion, how could you defeat it on the battlefield? There's only one way: survive on your wits and make the invaders pay in ways they didn't expect or prepare for. The Ukrainians figured out many different ways to do this, often taking advantage of Russian incompetence and corruption. The most important way, though, was through Ukraine's use of drones. In the war's opening phase, larger drones like Turkey's Bayraktar TB2 played an important role in destroying Russian convoys and even sinking the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva. Russia was unprepared for this type of conflict, but Ukraine then surprised their enemies again, this time with smaller first-person view or FPV drones. What are these, and why have they proven so effective on the modern battlefield? Let's take a look at how Ukrainian drone pilots have used these to devastating effect on the Russian forces and how vital they are for Ukraine's war effort as a whole. On June 18, 2024, Russia lost over 100 vehicles. Ukraine lost about 30. It was nearly a record in both the number of Russian vehicles lost and the ratio of Russian vehicles lost compared to Ukrainian vehicles. But Ukraine didn't need to expend a lot of precious artillery shells or expensive Javelin missiles to do this. Most of the time, FPV drones were responsible for the destruction of Russian tanks. FPV drones have onboard cameras that transmit their visual feeds as a live stream directly to the operator's preferred device. This can be a panel, tablet, or smartphone, but in Ukraine, goggles or headsets are the most popular method because they let the operator directly see what the drone sees. One of Ukraine's ace drone operators, codenamed Darwin, said in a documentary entitled Darwin's War, inside the secret bunker of Ukraine's ace FPV drone pilot, that he feels like a bird when he's on a mission, a bird that explodes in the end. These drones are cheap, typically ranging from a few $100s to perhaps slightly less than $2,000 on Amazon. The headsets and goggles will cost extra, typically ranging from a mere $40 to something more sophisticated at $800. The drones used on June 18th were likely in the $500 price range, and yet these weapons have destroyed Russian vehicles that cost between thousands, hundreds of thousands, or in the case of the tanks that have fallen prey to them, millions of dollars. One can see why these FPV drones are ideal for a country like Ukraine, which must contend with a wealthier, more powerful neighbor by traditional military reckoning. Fortunately for Ukraine's armed forces, drones became capable enough to act as an equalizer at just the time Russia decided to invade their country. Unsurprisingly, the Ukrainians have invested heavily in this arm, producing and deploying about 100,000 of them a month, twice as many as the estimated 50,000 a month at the start of the year. It's currently on track to exceed its goal of producing 1 million by the end of the year. FPV drones act as excellent surveillance tools. They can monitor Russian troop movements and relay coordinates to artillery. However, they have had their biggest impact as weapons. Explosives are attached to these FPV drones. These can range from smaller anti-personnel weapons to larger shells. Early in the war, Ukraine attached 3D-printed fins to the millions of Soviet anti-tank grenades it had in storage. The drones then released these grenades onto enemy armored assets or simply crashed into them. It was an indication of how important FPV drones would become throughout the war. More recently, bigger explosives have been fitted to these weapons. Ukrainian drone pilots have taken to calling the largest shell that can be attached to an FPV drone the Avada Kedavra round, after the so-called killing curse in the Harry Potter series. The pilots gave it this name because it has a better chance of destroying enemy tanks. Once at their targets, the pilots then either release the explosives or, more often, crash the drones into them. Experienced operators like Darwin are so good that they can target the most vulnerable spots of their target to maximize their impact. For example, when hunting a vehicle, a good drone pilot can attack the driver or engine. The pilots are so good that they can fly their drones into pipes or through apartments where Russian troops are taking cover. Once inside, the drone can detonate in a specific room. FPV drone tactics have evolved quickly in Ukraine. According to Alexander Kamyshin, Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Ukrainian troops began using these kamikaze drones against large and obvious targets like Russian armored vehicles. As their skills improved, they began to locate and target command posts which, though hidden, were often kept close to the front lines in the war's first year, because senior officers in the Russian army do not trust their juniors and NCOs to take the initiative. Now, Ukraine's drone pilots can hunt down small groups of soldiers or even target individual soldiers, just as a sniper would. Kamyshin claims that the FPV drone has become Ukraine's main battle weapon. A first-hand look into an FPV drone mission gives a glimpse of how terrifying these weapons can be to the enemy, unfortunate enough to be on the other side of them. In one instance, Darwin flies his drone around, looking for a Russian soldier who is trying to hide. The drone hovers ominously until Darwin finds his enemy and crashes into him. Even more ominously, good pilots can bring their drones in slowly so that their targets won't hear them and run away. Other drones, like the so-called Vampire, are large enough to drop multiple explosives or even lay landmines or deliver ammunition to isolated Ukrainian positions. The Vampire drone is feared enough among Russian soldiers that they've taken to calling it the Baba Yaga, claiming that it has huge claws capable of picking up their wounded and flying them to laboratories. In 2023, Russia began to realize the importance of these drones as casualties and burned-out vehicles piled up. Steadily, the Russians began to ramp up their FPV drone production. By December, Ukrainian sources estimated that Russia was producing 300,000 of them per month, 6 times more than their own side. Some Ukrainian commanders said at the time that the Russians had 7 FPV drones in the air for every 1 Ukrainian. However, Ukraine has since regained the advantage. Russian FPV drone activity peaked in January 2024 and has since declined, with Ukraine's lead growing as the year matured. Soviet-style centralized production of drones may be one of the reasons for the decline in Russian activity. Russia has only one official long-range drone, the Iranian Shahid, which is built at one factory in Alabuga in the Russian Republic of Tatarstan. There is also only one tactical drone, the Lancet. In contrast, Ukraine has invested heavily in a variety of companies that build drones throughout the country. The Ukrainians are currently operating at least 15 types of long-range drone and several tactical drones. In his interview on the aforementioned documentary, Alexander Kamyshin mentioned that as the minister in charge of Ukraine's war production, FPV drones were his top priority. The numbers bear this out. Despite the vast increase in production, though, he jokingly responded that there were never enough drones available. To ensure that it reaches its goals, Ukraine has enlisted vast swathes of its civilian population in the drone effort. Production is so decentralized that local artists make some of the drones by hand, get orders and send them to the front. Each unit also has a specialized workshop to modify the drones according to its needs. The drones are often crowdfunded and donated by charities. FPV drones are a popular item for Ukraine's official crowdfunding campaign. Kyiv is inviting people from around the world to take part in achieving victory over the Russian invaders by contributing their money to the drone effort. There are other reasons Ukraine has regained the lead in the drone war. Just because the Russians have come to recognize the importance of drones doesn't mean they're fully competent in drone warfare. The rise of drones that can destroy tanks worth millions of dollars for the price of a few thousand at most has significantly increased the importance of anti-drone defenses. Unfortunately for the Russians, they aren't good at it. Once again, the Ukrainians have proven to be ahead of the curve on this aspect of drone warfare. Just before he was fired from his position as its top general in February, General Valery Zaluzhny said that creating more electronic warfare systems to counter drones was one of the Ukrainian military's most urgent needs. This followed on the heels of a statement from Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, made last October, when he said that every area where soldiers congregate must be protected by anti-drone jammers. Anton Vaklenko, a drone trainer, said that just as both Ukrainian and Russian generals were a year behind on the importance of FPV drones, they were now a year behind on the importance of jammers, though his seniors seem to be getting the message now. Ukraine has recently had assistance in this area. Handheld drone jammers like the Lithuanian Skywiper and more sophisticated systems like the Polish Sky Control have now found their way into the Ukrainian ranks, and these have had enough effectiveness to keep many of Russia's FPV drones grounded. The effectiveness of these jammers was one of the reasons why Russia couldn't gain a decisive advantage in the drone fight, despite outnumbering Ukraine at one point. In contrast, Russia has had far less success with jamming Ukraine's drones. Like Ukraine, Russia has emphasized the production of electronic drone jammers, but in a piece of news that might not surprise you, a lot of them don't work. One notable instance saw a popular Russian military blogger complaining about the common use of a $2,400 jammer. The blogger disassembled this jammer and alleged that it ran too hot to be effective. Its cooling equipment was simply inadequate. Also, the antenna was angled wrong, pointing up when most FPV drones attack from the side, therefore losing 90% of its electronic warfare effectiveness. The antennas cannot be adjusted either, so the troops that are unfortunate enough to use this jammer have no choice but to hope that the Ukrainian drones will somehow come at them from a vertical angle, if the jammer hasn't overheated by then. The military blogger alleged that the popular Two Majors Telegram channel, the same one that promoted the idea that Russia should reclaim Alaska, was causing Russian troops to die by peddling this product to the soldiers through a charitable fund. This would be far from the first time that a social media influencer peddled nonsense. Unfortunately for the Russians, this time the nonsense comes with deadly consequences. To make matters worse for the Russian military, this is far from the only ineffective jammer in their arsenal. An illustration of this occurred in a curious incident in April near Terny, a village west of Kreminna in Luhansk Oblast. There, a Russian attack stalled after it ran into Ukrainian mines and a screen of FPV drones. Russian survivors did what they have often done since the start of the war: abandon their vehicles and run for the hills. One of the vehicles left behind was a brand new and nearly undamaged T-72B3M tank, equipped with a cluster of drone jammers. The Ukrainians nicknamed this new variant of the T-72 Russia's Tsar-EW, electronic warfare tank. This was a significant evolution and, in theory, a much better defense against drones than the infamous cope cages. Ukrainian drone operators understandably got nervous when they saw these tanks appearing on the battlefield. How would these units affect the drone effort? Might they nullify one of their country's best weapons? The only way to find out was to capture one and examine the equipment. Ukraine seized the opportunity at Terny and captured the tank on a mission that lasted 3 nights. The Russian crew was so careless that it not only abandoned the tank intact, but it left it on and drained its batteries. Ukrainian troops had to insert new batteries and then drive the tank back for a mile in the darkness while braving the possibility of Russian artillery fire. When they got back safely, they discovered that the jammers, though equipped with factory-standard antennas, were clustered together in a slapdash fashion and were almost certainly ineffective against FPV drones. The dangerous mission paid off, and at least for now, Ukrainian drone pilots could breathe a sigh of relief. Because of the new production efforts, the effectiveness of Ukraine's jammers, and the ineffectiveness of the Russian jammers, the former has solidified its lead in drone warfare. For the moment, the Russian jammers are likely not the most dangerous thing for Ukraine's drone operators. Enemy drones and artillery are the biggest threats. For these reasons, drone pilots never stay in the same place for long. They move from one cramped bunker or trench to another. It's a game of cat and mouse, with the pilots often looking for their enemies in these hidden places behind the lines that recall World War I. But like in the Great War, these dugouts aren't too far behind the lines. FPV drones don't have the range to provide their pilots the luxury of being out of the range of enemy weapons. Artillery is often pounding the area nearby. If you think being a drone pilot is a safe occupation during wartime, this should be enough to make you think again. They try to sneak some sleep in when they don't have comrades in need of help, but only one pilot at a time can do this. Someone has to keep watch. The pilots are given a set of drones, perhaps 40 for a day's outing, and get to work. This work is vital, which is why breaks are short and often interrupted. Drone support is needed on a moment's notice to assist infantry that comes under attack or to strike important Russian positions. The work can be tedious too. Although Russian jammers are often ineffective on a grand scale, many FPV drones are still lost in combat, and their pilots often have to try again and again to ensure a successful mission. It can take multiple drones to destroy the assigned target. Typically, less than half of FPV drone missions are successful. A top operator like Darwin can achieve success rates of 50%, which is considered good. Experienced pilots mentioned on camera that AI has already helped their drones find moving targets and even people hiding in bunkers, since they can be located from their body heat. AI technology, which permits the drones to take their own initiative to strike targets, is also under development. For the moment, this technology is too expensive to see widespread use, but both sides are competing with each other to develop cheaper versions. Recently, the Ukrainians have developed specialized armor-piercing ammunition, a modification of standard explosive form projectile (EFP) rounds. These rounds are attached to the drones and are particularly effective against armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and self-propelled artillery. Although these EFP rounds are not powerful enough to destroy tanks like other shaped charges are, they have the advantage of a much longer range. The FPV drones can trigger these rounds far from their targets. They will then zigzag through cope cages or protective netting and impact the target. Tellingly, the same Fedorov that mentioned the need for anti-drone defenses sent to Newsweek in December that FPV drones can at times be even more efficient than artillery. Ukraine's shell shortage in late 2023 and early 2024 cost it much on the battlefield. Even now, as Ukraine starts to get more ammunition, Russia is producing shells 3 times faster than Ukraine's allies for a quarter of the cost. Still, Ukraine has managed to stay in the fight and even increase the casualties it's inflicting on Russian troops, in large part thanks to its lead in the FPV drone race. The increased quantity and quality of drones have mitigated some of its disadvantages and given it the opportunity to win the war of attrition, as long as it can maintain the support of its Western allies. What other adaptations do you think might come soon in the drone war? Will the war lead to a world of autonomous machines that can make the decision to kill people on their own, as some analysts expect and fear? what counter-drone technologies might develop next? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also make sure to